Susan to the front of the room to speak more about the work that they do. And then what I would just encourage you to do is just consider the amazing work that they're doing and just how can we learn from that within our own league. So thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Tiffany. So for me, it's easier. I do have written remarks, and it's easier for me. So I hope you'll bear with me, and I hope the content will keep your attention. So thank you again for inviting me to talk about our league, our advocacy, and the responsibilities and privileges of being a leader in our community. So like Junior League, the League of Women Voters is a legacy organization that promotes the education and development of women leadership, along with outreach to all voters. We're a 96-year-old organization that emerged immediately from the passage of the 19th Amendment, which provided the right to vote for women, and that was over 2 million women who immediately got that vote. So the League was formed and determined that those new voters would be registered, well-informed on the issues of the day, and to show up at the polls. And so our mission really has not changed throughout our history, and in fact has only expanded. So we're about educating and advocating for all Minnesotans. Like Junior League, we're a part of a national organization that shares a common mission statement, but its execution varies from state to state and on the local league level. So in Minnesota, we currently have 1,600 members who devote their time and energy to our voter service program, which is voter registration and candidate forums. We also study issues at various levels, which is the basis of where we get our position statements from. So if you've ever had a chance to look at our website, you'll see that both national and the state have position statements, and they're about 100 pages in length. So over the course of our history, we've taken time to take positions through our studies that include voting rights, election integrity, which is a hot issue these days, immigration reform, socioeconomic equity for all, public education, judicial independence, and protection of our natural resources. So every 2 years at our national convention, we determine if there are policy reforms that we want the entire membership to look at. So this past June, we voted on a program that will focus on voting protection rights, expansion of the franchise, campaign finance reform, redistricting, and supporting the District of Columbia's desire to seek statehood. At the state level, we've adopted a similar program, but designed it to align with Minnesota legislative initiatives that we work collaboratively with other coalitions. So specifically, the issues we're following are restoring the rights of those who lost their right to vote due to a past felony record. We are seeking passage of the Disclosure Act that would force campaigns to identify where the money is coming from. Not even addressing the flow of money, but just identifying where the money is coming from. And right now it's nearly impossible to know who's supplying the vast amounts of money that are coming from outside of Minnesota, pouring in to influence our state and local elections. And case in point is there's a local state election race in St. Cloud, and it's considered to be one of the most expensive races right now in the country. The local money is very modest, but there's over $1 million flowing into this campaign from outstate sources, and we don't know where that's coming from or who's doing it. We also support early voting, which this year, for the first time, 1 week prior to the general election, voters can show up at their municipal or county office, apply for an absentee ballot, complete it on site, and then the ballot will actually go through the counter. So that's, while we're in favor of total early voting, without all these extra hoops that you have to jump through, we're delighted that it's being made available in Minnesota. And you know, we're hoping the legislation will continue to tweak it but they seem reluctant to go full charge into a major change. So we take these small victories as they come. We advocate for pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds so that when they apply for their driver's license, they will be put on the rolls and ready to vote when they turn 18. We're also working with a national campaign to support automatic voter registration at the DMV and other state offices. Currently, we have an opt-in system, which very few people actually know about. There's a tiny little box on the form that allows you to say, please include my information in voter registration. But what we're advocating for is an actual opt-out system. But there's some genuine concerns about making sure that with that opt-out system, that those that have felonies or are non-citizens are not mistakenly registered. And then they would be subject to a felony, and as a non-citizen, they would actually be deported. So we want to make sure we're not causing more trouble than we need. Our advocacy work sometimes confuses the public. As a nonpartisan organization, we never endorse candidates or political parties, but we do advocate for a progressive platform. We are often, and of late, brutally condemned as an organization that is a left-wing arm of the DFL party, which is a false attack, I'm telling you right now, and one that I often have to refute. We have our detractors who really resent the work that we're doing and will do everything they can to tear us down. It's very destructive and very disruptive to our work. So of late, we've had to double our efforts on voting rights. Our current program is dubbed Making Democracy Work for All. The fairly recent and furious threats to voter registration, the dismantlement of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Supreme Court ruling on Citizen United regarding funding campaigns, and other legislative initiatives are strategic efforts to narrow who gets to vote and who will hold the power. The most recent allegations in the presidential campaign about rigged elections are of absolute concern to us. Our election system is not rigged, and those that continue to spread those rumors do more to destroy the fragile nature of our democracy. And this is not to be taken lightly. The integrity of our elections is a cornerstone of our democracy. If in any way this is compromised, we have very serious issues to address. So within the last 10 years, we have witnessed a concerted national effort to narrow the franchise, evidenced by eliminating polling places in communities of color, so it forces them to travel much farther and usually off transportation lines. Voter ID is being adopted in many states, and we're seeing demands of proof of citizenship. Voting should be nonpartisan, and every elected official should be in favor of expanding the franchise, not tearing it down. Just 2 weeks ago, the Minnesota State Supreme Court redirected a case by the Minnesota Voters Alliance, who petitioned to end same-day registration in Minnesota. They're convinced, and want others to believe the same, that there is rampant fraud in our election system. By eliminating same-day registration, they believe it would thwart fraudulent efforts. What it really would do is prevent new residents, and particularly college students, from voting. And I can assure you there is no fraud in Minnesota, nor is there nationally. There's been one study that shows that there have been 31 instances of substantiated instances of fraud in the United States. 31 from the year 2000 to 2014. So think about the millions of voters that are casting their ballots, and we've had 31. So I can assure you it's a fairly safe system. Secretary of State Simon actually was quoted this week that in Minnesota we have a decentralized system across 87 counties and across the cities. Our election judges are well trained, and it's just not going to happen. So if people question you on this, really, give them the facts. It's not true. So, and the other thing that is important in our system is we use a paper ballot, which is So, and it's not to make light, of potential fraud creeping into our system. I mean, there's always opportunity. But the United States has had a very long record in keeping its elections clean. But to put this in perspective, this will be the first election since the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965 that is not fully protecting the voters. Under the act, states known to have a history of discriminating against voters needed to receive pre-clearance from the State Department. The Supreme Court stripped the pre-clearance requirement, indicating that the fear of discriminating against voters, poll taxes, things like that, were a thing of the past. I would beg to differ, and it is why the League and other organizations are lobbying our congressional delegations to pass the Voting Rights Advancement Act of 2015 to restore the laws passed in 1965. And in case you didn't know, the entire Minnesota delegation in 1965, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, all voted unanimously in favor of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Currently, that's not true in our delegation. And so, we have an open seat this year in Congressional District 2, and we've got some other competitive races. And so we're hoping that after the elections, we'll be able to go back to our delegation and convince them that this is something that they should be supporting. So one of the questions I was asked to consider today is whether we're a divided nation. And unfortunately, I would have to answer in the affirmative. I think we've lost our way in being able to be respectful to differing opinions. We seem to be more interested in being right than being open to a different viewpoint that does not, in fact, that does in fact have its own truth. It's just not one that we necessarily espouse. This week, a friend of mine submitted an op-ed piece to the Star Tribune about our inability to communicate with one another. And she opened her piece by describing a walk through the woods with a naturalist. She was asking him specific questions about the plants she was looking at, and he would just counter with additional questions. And this initially annoyed her. And he said, if I answer your questions, then you're just going to go on to the next thing, and you're just going to forget about, the things that we're exploring. And she then related an experience with friends she was in conversation with about political activities right now. And they were really butting heads. And so after that experience, she said there are 4 things that we should be doing in order to re-engage with those who hold differing opinions. So she was recommending, 1, to stay out of the box. As soon as we associate with a party or advocate a controversial idea, our views become suspect. She became one of those people. However, when she avoided the labels and focused on specifics, she found many shared interests and even agreement. Rather than arguing about global warming, they agreed that pollution was a concern. Instead of debating gun control, they agreed on the need for greater safety. Avoiding labels helped. Second point was to ask questions. Be curious, genuinely curious. Ask, what would you do? What kind of community do you want to live in? What goals do you have for your family, your community, your country? Amazingly, when those questions were asked, they found the commonalities. They found that they wanted safe streets, effective education, a working government, ethical leaders. Questions helped them get to the heart of what mattered. The third point, don't go down the rabbit hole. It's easy to react. You might be offended by what you hear. It might make your hair stand on end, but don't take offense. Share your views, but then just for a moment, let go of the need to be right. Make room for differences. Be respectful. Keep talking. And it's easy to take offense, but don't go down that rabbit hole. It really doesn't help. And then her last point was stick with it. This is some of the toughest work you'll ever do. We crave that dopamine that comes out with a good fight. And so when we hear bad news about the other side, or read the article that validates our point of view, we tend to cheer. Well, the cheers for the sporting events. And so I believe, when I read this, I believe this to be sound advice that, that every leader really should be considering and paying attention to. As leaders, no matter in what community, big or small, it's up to us to provide the space in which real dialogue can happen. So how do we begin to rebuild the civil back into civic engagement? For the League, we know we must be intentional about building genuine relationships with community organizations that we have not regularly worked with. League serves on several voting rights coalitions in support of specific legislative initiatives. Many of those groups are community groups that represent people of color who have long been left out of the tables of power. We see with recent headlines that groups like Black Lives Matter are trying to draw attention to issues that have long impacted their communities. We see the increase of Somalis, Asians, and Latina in our state, that they too want to have a voice in their community so that they can help shape the policies that will affect them directly. This inevitably increases tensions between the groups that have traditionally held the power and to those who want to have a share of the power. There is much that we don't understand about one another, and until we take the time to understand the issues as seen by those who feel disempowered, we will never be able to achieve a truly healthy community. So I'm trained as a city planner, and one of the early lessons I learned in that community, is that community is not defined as a single harmonious group, but actually a group of varied interests that find common threads to be able to honor varied cultures and norms. We have a tendency to want to separate into our tribes and not to be with the other. That would be family, not community. Instead, I believe we have many opportunities to learn from the mistakes of our history. Each of us has a story, a perspective to share, and it all has validity. So this is the toughest work I see the League engaging in over the next 5 to 7 years. For if we don't choose to dig in and learn to navigate the cultural differences that make up our communities, we will just be an afterthought. As a start towards making positive changes, I'm engaging my board, staff, and piloting with some of our members cultural diversity training. Through our organization, though our organization has very limited resources and capacity, I made it a priority to have a community organizer who works with us, helping to establish relationships with our community partners. She acts as the liaison between our partners and our local leagues. We're scheduling one-on-one conversations with members, and we're holding group trainings. We will only succeed in keeping our democracy strong if we all play our roles in respectful conversations with one another, and we take the time to understand each other's perspectives. And so this work is especially hard for white people. We've enjoyed generations of being privileged that it is so embedded in our culture that even the best intentioned people can make some glaringly inappropriate statements that leave young women and people of color angry and frankly not wishing to associate themselves with an organization that just doesn't get it, that you believe need to be incorporated into our communities. But remember, the opposition is just as passionate about their viewpoint. So where we can find the commonalities, the points in which some sort of consensus can be established. So where can we find the commonalities? You know, the points in which some sort of consensus can be established, that's small victories for the good of the whole can be incorporated and accomplished. That's the work that we're trying to do. As women, I think we have an obligation to step up to leadership positions. Let's face it, men and women think and approach problem solving very differently. I believe that as more women take on roles of public leadership, we will see a shift. It takes courage, it takes a strong backbone, and it also requires us to be able to create a space in which differences can live in respectful opposition. While conditions have improved for women, we still experience a lot of discrimination in all aspects of living. If you're a woman of color, it is even worse. We have an opportunity to model a different way of approaching problem solving that could truly benefit all of our communities. Simple ways in which we can play a role in advocacy is to develop relationships with your elected officials at every level. Let them know what you think about certain policies and offer potential alternative solutions when appropriate. Thank your legislators for the work that they do. It's a tireless job with few rewards. Write letters, respond to action alerts from organizations you follow. My first civic engagement occurred when I was in 5th grade. Our teacher said, find a issue you want to work on and then go to it. So as I go back into my memory, my position was the killing and canning of wild horses for dog food. I have no idea how I came to that position, especially since I don't like horses, but I did. And I led a very avid letter campaign writing campaign, and it really started me on my lifetime of advocacy. So you never know what's going to spark one's interest. So get involved at the local level within your communities through commissions, task forces, or run for office. I served as a city commissioner in Edina, and I've lost the other pages. Here we go. A few years ago, I served on their Environment and Energy Board. I was the water quality expert. While I had some previous professional experience relating to water quality issues, I had to really bone up on the issue. And so I spent a lot of hours reading and learning about current laws and ways in which cities relate to the DNR and how we mitigate our waterways. It really was a phenomenal experience. And I actually had the opportunity to draft a city ordinance that eliminated the use of coal tar products found in driveway sealants, which when applied to a driveway over time cracks, and that stuff seeps into our waterways, and it happens to be a carcinogenic. So it is a proven killer of the aquatic life and potentially has derelict impact on human beings as well. So choose an area that you really have a passion for. Be patient and persistent. This is the league way. We know that we cannot win issues, every session. I mean, we just have to stick with it. And so, there are issues that we've been tracking for decades, and we continue to advocate our positions. The victories don't come too often, but when they do, they're pretty sweet. Encourage your friends and neighbors to lend their voices to a cause, even if their opinion differs from yours. Our democracy is so much stronger when more participate. There's often a rebuff to a third-party candidate, but that's really one of the benefits of having a democracy. Allow the minority voices to rise and have a seat at the table. They have valid ideas too, and the established parties can often drown that out. We need to listen to the other sides and really listen, and then tease out the threads where we can find commonality. Get your children involved. Talk to them about issues that concern them and give them opportunities to express themselves. We have developed a new curriculum called Your Voice, Your Vote Minnesota, which is an online curriculum which tells the history of voting rights and the barriers that were experienced by specific communities. We partnered with 13 organizations to have them give us their histories. We were not about to write their history. That would have been totally inappropriate. And so we provided the platform for that to happen. And so we're taking that out into the schools now, and our hope is that students, as they interact with that website, that they'll share their reflections about the issues that are of concern to them, and to have a space in which they can not only be heard, but encouraged to engage and share their thoughts. So listening is just a really critical tool of leadership. The more we create the space to hear from others, the more we can shape public policy to meet those needs. Demand more from your elected officials. Don't let them get away with not addressing your concerns. We need to hold them accountable, particularly if it's apparent that that special interest groups are propping them up. You are the constituents, and don't let them forget it. Make room for others, share the power. We will have stronger communities and a stronger nation if we all dig into this work. The beauty of our democracy, it was designed to be reformed. Our forefathers laid an amazing aspirational foundation. And as we live into the nationhood, we're struggling right now to determine who gets to have a slice of the American dream. I believe we all are entitled to a slice of that dream. But it's going to take leadership, empathy, and constructive problem solving to convince those who feel threatened by the widening of the circle to see that we will benefit by creating equitable opportunities for all of us. And that's all I have to say. So thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you want to have a conversation about advocacy and what would love to entertain those questions.
I have a question. So, like, you ran for water board commissioner.
Actually, it wasn't an elected position.
Yeah.
I
that's what
applied,
I was gonna say.
yeah, I applied for it. So in the city of Edina, they have a bunch of different commissions and task force. And they publicize the openings. So I had a 2-year term. And so when the time came, there were a few openings for that board, so I